The Caverns. Beneath the waveless surface of a black lake, a mireling choked, writhed, and drowned. Its soft flesh fizzled and dissolved from between its pale, chitinous carapace. Above the surface, standing on the shore, its fellow fae stood watching in relative terror. They chittered, cackled, and hissed. Each one of about a dozen of them tried to stand behind the rest, resulting in the whole of them shuffling from front to back. Wisps of blue spectral flame curled up and away from the skull as it hovered over the submerged, dying creature. Its features, fleshless and thereby expressionless, remained almost comically stoic above the churning spot of water in the otherwise motionless lake. As the last bits of offal dissolved, the bony parts of the mireling sank, bubbling into the darkness. The skull clicked its teeth. Behind the mirelings, more figures of different shapes stirred in the shadows. Under the red sky of dusk, fingers of dark clouds reached out from the west, and silver veins of lightning flashed across them. Drops of rain pitter-pattered on Hamish's head and shoulders. The trail had led them into a bog, then disappeared. As night crept nearer, Hamish sent Zaldivar to scout ahead. Zaldivar came back into the clearing, gingerly avoiding patches of swamp water. "Anything?" Hamish asked, rubbing the back of his neck. Zaldivar approached the group of weary travelers and pulled back his hood. "A cave! Dark as my own heart, and it reeks a bit." Hamish stared at Zaldivar for a long moment. Hild asked, "Could it be worse than sleeping in the rain?" Hamish turned to Vagelin. "Milady, you're funding this sortie." As the rain soaked into her clothing, Vagelin considered the darkening surroundings and the wet faces of her companions. "Past the bog is Lake Lemura. There is an inn on the other side of the lake. It's hours away," she sighed. "Let's see this cave." It wasn't far off. They each had to lead their horse, for the footing in the swamp was not to be trusted. The rain came harder, and by the time the horses were tended, the sun was set, and they were all drenched. Hild sparked her lantern and held it up high. The dripping cave walls were decorated with ichor and tangled roots. Beyond the entrance, the cavern opened up into a natural vault, tall enough to stand and wide enough for them all to have some space. A very narrow stream was running down the center from the cave mouth. It disappeared into the darkness at the back of the cave. Pushed into the corner was a tangle of branches, long and thick and, most importantly, dry. They made short work of putting together a pile of wood for burning. Soon they were all crowded around Hild, who was making sparks before the pile of wood. "I know there's a spell for fire," Vagelin assured herself as she paged through her parchments in the dim lantern light, her voice echoing hollowly. "How does a sorceress not know a spell for fire?" asked Bowen as he wrung out his gloves. Vagelin made a sour face. "Spellcraft isn't conjuring. Conjuring is different from invocation. Invocations are not the same as sorcerings, or pyrotactics, or evocations for that matter. Shall I go on?" "You sound like Zaldivar," Bowen replied and sat down beside her with a thud. Zaldivar called from the entrance. "Alchemy is none of those. Thaumaturgy is all and more. I meddle with no magics. I'm a man of science. Magication is not the same as magic." Bowen wondered aloud. "Different fingers from the same glove, Hornswoggler?" Zaldivar grinned. "Here it is," Vagelin cheered. "I've nearly got it started," said Hild from where she crouched. Bowen interjected. "Why aren't we using the flame from the lantern?" Hild answered with a question of her own. "Where's the fun in that?" "I want heat, not challenge," chided Bowen, and he stretched. Vagelin held up the scroll and straightened her shoulders. Proudly she declared, "This should help." She closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and began the incantation. Her voice took on an otherworldly timbre. Everyone turned to watch as smoke wisps wove into the air above a spot in the pile of wood. She opened her eyes wide and finished the spell. There was a concussive burst of flame, heat, and force. Wood and sparks went everywhere. Hild leapt back with singed hair. There was no fire, only a few smoldering sticks among the many spread across the cave floor. Vagelin looked around at their shocked faces, and she blushed. "I'm still working on that one." Hild smiled up at her. "Not to worry." She began to gather the wood back into a pile. Brune, ignoring them, noted, "Those branches didn't walk in here." In the dim light of the lantern, Bowen gave Brune a quizzical look. Brune shrugged. He explained, "Drainage had been my guess." "So?" Bowen pressed. Flames danced to life, and Hild breathed gently onto them. As the dry wood lit up, She rubbed her hands together and added, "Would take a lot of water to move all that wood." "Exactly," said Brune. "Let's hope it doesn't rain all that much." He pulled off his soaked boots. "Otherwise, we'll be swimming out." Bowen turned to Sparrow, who was peering down toward the back of the cave. "How deep do you think it goes?" "Difficult to say," answered Sparrow, "though I can hear the water running on for quite a ways." Vageland gazed into the fire. "Caverns are not a rare thing in these parts, though Benarubius suggests that most are underground waterways, the aquifers. The Agura, the great river, runs just along the other side of our westernmost mountains. When I was a girl, explorers tried to map a tunnel system under the mountains to open a trade route with Camdish in the west. They never came back." She shrugged and looked off into the shadows. "It's not surprising. At least a score of children's stories warn never to enter such a place." The fire grew. Hamish, who had been gingerly kicking the corpses of a few dead mice from the mouth of the cave, came over and warmed his hands. The cave walls, as much rotten root as nitre-riddled rock, shone orange and eerie. The weather outside turned for the worse, and the wind began to howl. Hamish assigned watch rolls. They ate from rations Vageland provided, and soon sleep was overtaking them, one by one. "I know your thoughts," Vageland confided to Hamish while they lay beside the fire. She spoke quietly enough for her voice to be covered by the sounds of the fire and the storm outside. Stirred from near sleep, he rolled onto his shoulder to look at her, unsure of her meaning. She gathered her cloak around her and continued in the hushed tone, "You still suspect that my father was taken by Fae?" He considered telling her it was the fell, the monstrosity, that he truly suspected, but he said nothing. "I'm willing to concede that possibility," she sighed. Hamish, more sympathetic than Vageland knew, nodded. "The Fae do not take prisoners." "I will find him," she whispered, and her voice held a determined grace. "I will find out what happened." She rolled onto her back and wiped a tear from her eye. "And I will root out what evil has befallen him." As she spoke those words in that dismal cave, she felt as if a weight were lifting from her chest. It was as if, by taking these bold steps toward her fate, her diffidence was fading. Despite her tears and the concern she felt for her father, she was not afraid. Sleep was crawling into Hamish's mind. He wondered, hoped even, if this lord wasn't off on a drunken bender after all. Yet Hamish had been at this type of work for a long time. From what he had been told of Lord Vulgat, the man wasn't the sort to simply wander off. Hamish watched Vageland, vague, her chest rising and falling as she breathed the dank air. "It stands to reason," he whispered back, "that whatever we've been tracking from where we found the sword came to this cave. When we wake, we shall see how deep these caverns go." She nodded, closed her eyes, and turned to face the fire.